Another hard-fought win for the Oklahoma City Thunder, maybe a too hard-fought win for the Oklahoma City Thunder, 109-108 over the Brooklyn Nets with Brady Trantham. I'm Erik G, and this is the Thunder wrap-up as the Thunder now move to a handful of games over 500. I believe there's 7 games over 500.
27 and 20.
After tonight, and Billy Donovan saying that this was one of the Thunder's best wins of the year. You and I are going to have different opinions on that. I'll start by saying that I didn't think it was a great win because you are playing a team that right now is 18-30 on the season, and you had to work so hard and at times just had stretches of where you're only getting one look at the basket. But no, I would not say this is one of the best wins of the year.
Well, it was against one of those ... teams that Carmelo Anthony kind of mentioned the other day at practice that the Thunder definitely needed to start gobbling up wins against. And in that respect, they finally, they've had their share of wins against these types of teams, but they got a win in a game where, like, midway through the third quarter, you and I were just kind of putting our arms up in the air thinking, like, what can the Thunder do when Brooklyn is hovering around 65% from the three-point line? But having said all that, I kind of understand where Billy Donovan is coming from. Given the past of this team this season, just where they've kind of struggled in games like this. I go back to the Portland game a few weeks ago in Chesapeake Energy Arena where the Blazers got hot. Thunder had no answer. The Thunder had an answer, and it was Raymond Felton in the fourth quarter, and they were able to ride that wave of momentum and, just kind of scratch away at that lead, and before you knew it, it was a one-possession game. The Thunder made the plays at the end to win it.
Well, you were coming here expecting the the Paul George show tonight.
One of those Pauls.
Yeah. Yes, and you definitely got it. I don't think either one of us were expecting Raymond Felton to have his best game of the year, at least his best quarter of the year, and put the Thunder on his back and carry them to a win. And it seemed like as soon as Raymond got hot, then Patrick Patterson got hot, and this team just fed off his energy and the shots that he was making. And defensively, I thought the effort was there all night. But when Felton was going off and taking this game over, the defense seemed to be making more stops at that time.
Yeah, I don't really know the exact numbers right now, but from just what I can remember, the Thunder did a very good job, team defensive-wise, just keeping the Nets out of the paint. They just got really unfortunate with a lot of bad bounces here and there that led to some wide open looks from beyond the arc. And then it got to a point kind of from the midpoint in the second quarter to the midpoint in the third quarter where Brooklyn just could not miss. Joe Harris had, was he still 5 of 5? He was 5 of 5 during the game from beyond the arc. And, you're gonna have that some nights, and thankfully for the Thunder, they were able to depend upon just being able to still play really good team defense and only having 4 turnovers as a team for the entire game. It was really it was a weird game. I've heard that said like a handful of times tonight. I thought this was just kind of a weird game. You look at the stat line, you kind of agree with that. It was particularly going back to that fourth quarter from Raymond Felton. It wasn't just Raymond Felton. He had the 10 points that kind of got everything started, but like you said, Patrick Patterson had back-to-back threes. Josh Huestis hit a huge 3. So the Thunder were able to chip away at that double-digit deficit with their reserve unit. So it was kind of amazing.
Which up to that point had given them.
Thanks, Steve.
Had given them absolutely nothing. Yeah. That bench has been awful this year, and for the first 3 quarters of this game, they were as unreliable as they normally were. But in the fourth is when they turned it on, which, you use that word weird. Certainly that falls into that category. I think what I want to see out of this team more than what we're seeing right now is just some overall consistency, and they don't have it. And you're playing a team that has just come off back-to-back wins, back-to-back close wins against so-so teams at best in the Nets, and then the Thunder have this great performance on Saturday where they destroyed the Cleveland Cavaliers, who, if we believe everything we're reading right now, are about to implode any second now.
They are the Jerry Seinfeld gif personifier where he's like sitting down, he's just like, I'm out of here.
I didn't just expect Paul George to have a really good game tonight. I thought you would see a starting 5 come out on fire and from beginning to end lead tonight, because this team might be turning it around. But as I said today on 5 Good Minutes, keep your money in your pocket. Don't buy your Thunder stock just yet, because we haven't seen them win consistently enough for me to think that they're finally putting it all together.
They're slowly getting on that good, like the last video cap that you and I did a few weeks ago, we were talking about that spectrum, and the Thunder in October and November, they were on the bad end of the kind of inconsistency. They're slowly getting onto the good end of that, where, I mean, right now in their last 10 games, they're 7-3. Everybody knows about their really great December where they went 18-5. They're slowly getting to that point where these kind of head-scratching losses are a little bit more few and far in between, and that's kind of where they're at right now. They have to keep gobbling up these wins against these opponents, and with Kawhi Leonard being out for the foreseeable future, with the Spurs and the Timberwolves, who are very talented, but in my opinion, like once you get closer to the postseason, you have to rely on veteran leadership, and the Timberwolves just do not have that postseason experience just yet. That the Thunder certainly do have. So you hope that the Thunder, as they slowly inch their way closer to that good end of that spectrum, that these 7-3 runs and these 10-game stretches become more prominent.
Right now, I think it's hard to see the Thunder being able to take out Houston, Golden State, maybe San Antonio, depending on what happens with Kawhi Leonard. But still, even with all that drama, they're third in the West. I don't see the Thunder being able to beat those top three teams in a 7-game series, at least right now, without some moves being made to bolster that bench. But I think the Thunder are going to have to consider a few things. One, I think if you can get rid of Alex Abrinas, even if you're not getting much in return, I'd go ahead and do it. I'm beginning to think that he's not going to pan out. But the question is who can you get right now? Who's out there that will make this bench better and put the Thunder where they are where they become a true playoff threat to anyone at this point?
Yeah, I mean, Alex Abrinas was another, did not play, coach's decision tonight, didn't see the floor. I mean, he was a guy that I wrote about a few weeks ago that, I mean, this is just my opinion, because the first few years that Abrinas was in the Thunder organization as a draft and stash player up in Spain, he was always an untouchable. Everybody knows about his potential. Everybody knows about his high ceiling, and especially with the way the NBA is played, a three-point specialist is highly valued in this league. Having said all that, this is a different Oklahoma City Thunder team from the bottom up. I mean, this has always been, like, especially from Sam Presti, this has always been a sustained success organization. You want to win now, but you want to have pieces in play that can help you sustain that success that you have. This is a team that has a must-win now mentality. You've got Paul George, who's here for only at least a year. Carmelo Anthony, who has a player option to kind of go through at the end of the in the offseason. So basically, it's going to be interesting to see how Sam Presti handles himself at the trade deadline, because he's always been a GM that nobody can figure out. I mean, Woj couldn't even break him at the NBA draft. He was the one guy that he could not get. It's going to be interesting because fans, media, it's kind of a running joke. You can't kind of pinpoint what Presti's going to do, but this kind of throws a whole other monkey wrench into it, just considering how this season's philosophy is much different than in years past.
Well, and Sam Presti has, over the last few years, pulled off some really interesting moves at the trade deadline that have certainly helped the Thunder. And you think back to last year when you bring in Dougie McBuckets and Taj Gibson, and then was it the year before that where Enes Kanter got brought in, or was it a couple of years before that? And Kyle Singler was part of that trade.
Kyle Singler, okay, DJ Augustine.
Don't get on me about Kyle Singler. And I still say keep Kyle Singler on the Thunder at all costs, because he's the most interesting cat on this team other than Raymond Felton. But you mentioned Paul George, and both of us are of the philosophy that Paul George is only going to be here 1 year. I think both of us would probably bet that he's going to be a Laker. If Paul George was a Laker, is he an all-star?
You know, we kind of had this conversation prior to the game, and I think it's an interesting thing to debate, just from the standpoint of, if he's on the Lakers, Paul George and his team have a much different kind of ceiling than obviously this Thunder team does. This Thunder team was constructed to not only compete with the Warriors out west, but to possibly upset the Warriors and win an NBA championship. When you've got Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, and Paul George, you can certainly say that in the offseason. And they, because they dug themselves an 8-12 hole, they didn't really do themselves any favors with any all-star nods outside of Russell Westbrook. But if Paul George is on the Lakers, nobody's expecting the Lakers to make that much noise, even if they had Paul George. I mean, Paul George, Lonzo Ball, Kyle Kuzma, and a lot of okay to average role players on that team. Paul George certainly would have the numbers. He would have the spotlight playing in purple and gold with the Lakers. But because there wouldn't be that level of expectation, I think fans, media, and coaches would be more akin to possibly bring him onto the All-Star team because of lower expectations. But because the Thunder dug themselves a hole back in 2017 of this 2017-18 year, didn't really do themselves any favors.
Now, the All-Star game it seems like it's something that shouldn't mean that much to players, because when we start talking about legacy, how many All-Star games did Michael Jordan go to? How many All-Star games is LeBron or Kobe? But we don't ever mention that. When we mention like the greatest players of all time, we talk about things like MVP, titles, scoring titles, things like that. So the All-Star game, while it's provided some fantastic moments, it's still a game that's for the fans. Obviously, Paul George didn't take it that way, and I wonder how much something like that does ultimately play into his decision next year when he decides to either stay in Oklahoma City or go someplace else.
Well, these guys are, of course, these guys are human. They're caught up in the moment just like we are, and a perennial all-star like Paul George, it's probably quite a culture shock to not be named to an all-star team when he's not injured during the year like he is obviously this year. Melo kind of spoke to when he came here, he understood that there was going to be a large sacrifice that he had to make in order to make not only this team work, but just to have their goals be achieved if they can do that. Paul George, while he's, not as late in his career like Carmelo Anthony is, I think he kind of understands that as well, and he's a very self-aware person just from talking to him over the last few months. I think he'd probably agree that, we didn't do ourselves any favors when the way we started off this year, but Paul George knows he's an all-star. I mean, Russell Westbrook said as much in the post-game in the locker room where he said it was, I think he said outrageous. He talked for about a minute and 30 seconds, which was, I just told you before we went on.
That was good. That was good teammate Russ tonight.
Yeah, that was very good teammate Russ, and it was kind of cool because he was looking directly at Paul George's locker while he was answering the question. Let's just say this. If the Thunder really start basically winning a lot of games, I don't think Paul George will care that much because like he's been saying this entire time, he cares about winning. And if the Thunder continue to win, build that foundation that he spoke of a few weeks ago, and make a lot of noise towards the postseason and into the postseason, I think that this will just be a blip on the radar.
A ring would cure all. It's going to be extremely difficult to get that ring this year, even with the talent that the Thunder have, because at this point it's so hard to imagine anybody overtaking Golden State. But with that, for the fans not to be disappointed, what do the Thunder have to accomplish this season? Because it seems like even with this current win streak, this is still teetering on being maybe the most disappointing season in Thunder history, because you came in with such high expectations and you're looking at a team that's still just fifth in the West. So what has to happen in order for that not to be the case?
Yeah, it's really kind of hard to pinpoint just from the standpoint of we all, fans, media. I heard so many people say that this Thunder team was not only the best constructed team to defend the Warriors, but a legitimate shot at winning the West just from the players they brought in the offseason. I think the lowest expectation is this team has to get out of the first round. And if they're able to gobble up some wins as the season progresses and you get past the All-Star break, I think that's an attainable goal. I feel like if the Thunder draw anybody but the Rockets or the Warriors, I would favor them in any first round, even if it's against the Spurs, because this is probably going to be a Spurs team that will be sans Kawhi Leonard or with a Kawhi Leonard that hasn't played that much this season. And despite that, the Thunder still match up very well with the Spurs, and they have a good history of success against the Spurs in the postseason. I said it earlier with the Timberwolves, they're way inexperienced. Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins haven't sniffed the playoffs in their career. Jimmy Butler is tested, but when it's just one guy, we saw what happened last year with Russell Westbrook, one guy team in the postseason. The Thunder didn't get very far. With all that being said, the Thunder have to continue to improve on a lot of things before they start thinking about the postseason. But when we get there, like I said, other than the Rockets and the Warriors, I would favor the Thunder in a 7-game series against anybody else in the West.
If you're talking about teams imploding, and we've heard the drama that's going on around the Spurs and the drama that's going on around the Cavs, which one of those fan bases needs to be hitting the panic button right now?
You know, you kind of, your knee-jerk reaction would be to say the Spurs, but I mean, Spurs fans know it better than people on the outside. It doesn't matter who.
It's the Cavs.
It doesn't.
The Cavs fans need to be hitting the
Well,
pan